fellow at the Center for Reproductive Rights said, Nelson later had surgery to treat symptoms resulting from the delivery of her son. Now, she sued the Arkansas Department of Correction, charging that her treatment violated the 8th Amendment protection against cruel and unusual punishment. After winning her case at district court, Nelson's charges were eventually dismissed on appeal by a judicial panel that said prison officials couldn't have known that shackling was unconstitutional. Nelson was granted a rehearing before the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, supported by the American Civil Liberties Union National Prison Project. Her case was argued in September of 2008, and a decision is still pending. Perhaps most surprising about Nelson's case is that it is not at all uncommon. Last month, a former Washington inmate sued the state for shackling her during a birthing process and a high-risk pregnancy, treatment that included a leg iron and a metal chain across her stomach that weighed 12 pounds. Also, last month, former inmates of Cook County Jail filed a federal lawsuit in Illinois challenging the facility's shackling practice. Illinois became the first state to have legislation that prohibited shackling, and it remains one of 4 states that makes shackling explicitly illegal. How many states do we have? That's not rhetorical. We have 50 states. Only 4 of these states make it explicitly illegal to shackle women during a birthing process. Then, adding insult to literal injury, the women are not allowed to be with their children should they desire to be after the birth. Those children are taken immediately from them and placed in court custody and state custody until a court review. Now, I'll let that sink in for a second. One must also consider the rate of rape and forced sexual acts that are perpetuated by a power hierarchy in the prison system, especially in isolation and especially in solitary confinement for women on death row. Even in instances where a pregnancy or an act comes about quote-unquote consensually, that is still highly problematic because the power structure in place is inherently power over. Interviews of female prison guards and wardens revealed a tendency to actually channel aggressive male stereotypes and attempts to coerce or dominate the prisoners. And lesbian relationships, while inside, are predominantly channeling heteronormative standards on the outside. This, of course, is rarely documented in death row cases because of the severe isolation and antisocial solitary environment in which women are kept. Since I'm talking about the relationships here. Now, my final point. What role does rape culture and power dynamics play in all of this? I was actually kind of inspired to include this last bit in the talk, specifically because of a question that was raised at CEDP's tour stop on Friday evening. A young woman raised her hand and actually kind of stoked the fire on these questions about what does this look like, what is this culture that this society has, how is that affecting the way our prison systems don't work. So I thought I'd address that here. I thought it was pertinent. And I'm not just referring to the abuse carried out by guards either when I'm talking about this. Since women have been locked up in the U.S., there's been an industry cultivated around fabricating a sexualized and eroticized depiction of women behind bars. Sexploitation films are still being produced with this slant. And what does this mean in terms of seeing women who are actually behind bars as humans, people like you and I, instead of consumable objects and others? It means it's much harder to handle when women act out of a typically mainstream conception of what it means to be, quote, woman. When the paradigm of woman shifts from the societally typical nurturer and mothering to the perceived violent or killing, the public often wants to do away with these women as fast as possible, and they don't want to be responsible for confronting the issues that created this scenario in the first place. Now, women, especially poor and working class and of minority communities, are a disenfranchised people. They automatically have to deal with a layer of expectations that their station in life and class does not afford them. Then, on top of that, they are punished harshly for acting out of the existing power structure. It's obscene for a society to view a case such as Eileen Bornos's without shuddering. How dare that prostitute defend herself? She had those barbaric acts coming to her because of the evil lifestyle she chose. These are actual pieces of the rhetoric we hear when women defend themselves and are sex workers and then are imprisoned and put on death row. Okay? This is women acting out of their perceived roles, and a society reeling from it and reacting in the only way it was designed to, unjustly. It is precisely for these reasons that women are less likely to be actively involved in their cases and in their defense. They are constantly being told by their court-appointed attorneys to stop upsetting the apple cart. Just play nice and sweet and innocent, and maybe they won't execute you. Don't get political. That will only hurt your situation. Most women are encouraged not even to write back activists or advocacy groups by their legal aid because they don't want to be perceived as an agitator or as an aggressor. Now, of course, they're reluctant to become politically involved. Most female prisoners only have access to quote-unquote women-centered publications, i.e. the Bible and Good Housekeeping magazine. And that is the state of Texas calling those things women-centered publications. They are purposefully kept in the dark and disconnected from the abolitionist movement as a whole. And hell, some want to be left alone after the trauma that they went through. Now, I think to end on this note, it's incredibly important that we realize that women on death row are specially oppressed. And I want to echo some of Phil's sentiments here. They are an oppressed minority of women within an oppressed minority of prisoners who are an oppressed minority isolated because of this harsh punishment. Okay, this is threefold here that we're talking about. Being an abolitionist means being a women's rights advocate. This issue is not separate from the women's liberation agenda. It's actually on it. Okay, thank you.